Dr. Finnegan serves on the CU Denver Center for Business Education and Research Advisory Council. She teaches international business, marketing strategy, retailing. Her research focuses on international marketing and retailing strategy, as well as sports marketing. Her research has been published in various international business and marketing journals, including Journal of International Business Studies, Marketing Letters, European Journal of Marketing, International Journal of Management Reviews, and International Marketing Review. At present, she's collaborating on a revision of an international retailing paper and the writing of 2 manuscripts, one in international marketing strategy and another on sport marketing. So here's Dr. Finnegan.
Hi, thanks. Good morning. Thank you very much for showing up online and in person. But in person, we battled, well, as Tracy was saying, for having lived in Michigan, nothing. But it is quite chilly out. I come to you kind of humble about this whole process. The idea for this whole presentation was really just a study abroad. I wanted to take a group of students to Munich for study abroad, and I felt pretty ill-equipped to be able to discuss ethical issues because, with students who I already knew that I had to take to Dachau, so a concentration camp in Germany. And you know, it was tricky. There was a moment at which I had applied for a grant 2 years ago, but because of COVID, it turned out to happen last summer. So like the stars aligned that I was in Israel with Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum of Israel and global Holocaust expert. You know, they hold a lot of the expertise. I have lived in Poland, Russia, and Germany, among other places. So I knew enough to be humble, having seen concentration camps and understanding the weight of the moral and ethical weight of what this is. And I also wasn't 100% sure how prepared College of Business students would be for some kind of a, that kind of a trip, and a trip to Dachau. So I started out with that in mind. The first stop was at Yad Vashem, and they have an educational department. And I said, I'm taking a group of students. I'm not sure what to do to help prepare them, not just intellectually, but also emotionally, to what they may be seeing. So we kind of devised a greater strategy. They suggested reading material. We had a guest speaker from Yad Vashem speak for International Holocaust Remembrance Day in January. And so, although it started out with just a small group of students in my mind that we're having these activities, it seemed like a wasted opportunity not to open up everything to the university, because it's on Ash Wednesday at the start of the second year of the Ukrainian-Russian war. These topics have never been more important. It just doesn't go away. I don't know if it's human nature or whatever, but I want to make sure our students have a framework to be able to think about it in making business decisions. All right, so it did take a village. I've talked to Tracy, and I do want to thank the Daniels Fund and Tracy for supporting these kinds of initiatives, because they're we need to approach ethical decision making from so many different angles to be able to help prepare our students to be able to address these issues. If anyone is ever interested in learning about the Jewish National Fund Faculty Fellowship Program, it's been a wonderful experience, and 2 out of 3 of my current papers are with Israeli scholars as a result of just writing the grant for that. And ethics fellows who've actually helped me because we've talked about bits and pieces of this along the way. So thank you. And I hope to actually beg your favor for more input at the end of this, because we still have one more piece to go. So, you know, in business school, Tracy can attest to this. How we're taught to teach is here's a syllabus and a book by Dios. You know, like there's no pedagogical instruction. So we picked up things over the years, but in this particular issue, I wanted to get back to very basic things. So the lecture from Haley Dillman Sharon was the discussion about genocides in a wider framework. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The reading, they read the book Nights, and I'll talk about that activity. And seeing and reflecting is going to happen when we're there 1 month from now. We'll be in Munich as a group. And all of this, I believe, even when it's not direct head-on, these are ethical issues. They're getting and they're seeing examples of ethical decision-making along the way. So overall objectives, use the Daniels Funds principles to help me structure a way to think about ethical decision-making with my students. Help our students recognize ethical issues when they're slapping them in the face. And I think a lot of times they do, but we need broad examples from lots of different angles to kind of flex that muscle. I think it is actually a muscle to keep the minutia of business from overtaking every decision, like a financial result. Like it's a broader and bigger thing that we're doing as business people, and social and ethical issues are part of that. And this is a little harsh, sorry, but there's so much ignorance out there that and we were talking about the boiling frog. So when these things are happening and you're in the moment, it's very easy not to recognize what's going on, how your thinking about things is shaped over a long period of time, very slowly. So let's hope to God this never comes to the US shores. You could argue that it already has, but don't want to get into that. But equip our students, faculty, staff, everyone in our community not to have these things happen. So starting up the International Holocaust Remembrance Day event, it seemed well timed that we could create a calendar around this kind of event at the end of January. The two, Haley Sharon Dillman was really, she was a fantastic speaker from my perspective. I've gotten good feedback. We had, it was a hybrid event, so we had people online and we had people in the audience. About 40 people showed up one way or the other. And my students who were seated in this audience had very specific questions that I'll share with you. So this was the big picture. It was the start of the events for this spring trip to Munich. I got two kinds of feedback from the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. One was on the moments, the questions that were asked at that time. And then afterwards, people would stop me or email me about the event. One of the things that was very interesting for a lot of people was to understand the history of the word genocide and the definition of it. And it's kind of scary in the sense that there are events that we may never have thought of as genocides that have happened around the world that actually fit this definition. So we were talking about a big thing. The event was supposed to be a comparative view of genocide, featuring the Holocaust, but not only the Holocaust. The other kinds of events and the things that all teachers live for is the conversations with students, like trying to fit the framework into what they see. Like I had a conversation with a student for half an hour in the hallway about North Korea. Like what's a genocide, what's not a genocide. or does it fit? Like, those are the moments teachers live for. If nothing else that happens, I'm a happy person that that happens. The other thing that came from the greater community was that someone said, thank you, we've never had any discussion in Colorado Springs about the Armenian genocide ever, which, yeah, I have no context to know that, but also because she was talking mostly about the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide as a contrasting examples, but she did mention other examples over time. The second kind of thing that students and participants, other participants talked about was the fact that she offered a framework. She's like, well, we talk about genocide in terms of the event, people are dead, or maybe how people died, but not the process of genocide, which, as horrible as it sounds coming out of my mouth, that phrase was a really important part of a framework. Even one of the students had mentioned to me, I appreciated the fact that there was a kind of a intellectual framework rather than focusing on the sadness of any event, which is overwhelming at any moment. So I think that the Haley educated us all, myself included, in terms of how to think about these kinds of events and where they're occurring and when. And I have no doubt that there are Holocausts happening on this planet today. And I'm not sure in the history of man whether there's ever not something happening. But it's important to recognize the beginning steps, because one of the other points that Haley made was basically there is no action by outside powers as it's happening. It's only after the fact. So as citizens of the world and as citizens of the United States, we need to recognize signs of this happening. It doesn't mean that when classification and dehumanization happens, it always leads to genocide. It's more of a criteria. It's a necessary step in the path towards that behavior. These are the students' questions that I gave my students to. They had laptops and they were answering these questions before and after the seminar. Was trying to get them to see these events from lots of different individual perspectives. So have them stand in the footsteps of a civil servant, a government official, an individual who is living in that moment, not part of the government, but witnesses to it, and try to kind of reflect the different human angles of these horrible events. And trying to bring it back to how they themselves could recognize in their future positions how they might act or what they might be confronted with. So you never know as a teacher what we teach, how it sinks in and how it will be used. You just provide the information and hope for the best. But given the responses, and I think Tracy will agree that the lessons of it, at least for now, went to a place where we intended students to go intellectually, thinking about these things. Here is, I'll give you a sec to read just one piece of one response. They got it. They got it. I mean, when you create these assignments, you never know. You try. I just got the responses last week from their reading of the night, of Nights by Ellie Weissel. One of my students, to my surprise, in high school, had been at a presentation by Eli Weissel, and had remembered this. And I would have to say, I can't show the student responses to this because they were so personal. I wanted them to connect their own trajectory in life, their own turning points, things that they had read, people they met, the music they heard, and anything that was meaningful to them. Read this book and look at the protagonists' turning points in life and connect them. I mean, I don't know how you build empathy, but I think this is the start, is trying to personalize it and look for similarities and dissimilarities with the experiences of a person who's gone through something horrific, yet still has some common touchstones in his change of life. So before the book, they were supposed to make a list of their experiences, ideas that shape their own identity. As they were reading, they should have noted the protagonist change, and after kind of bring it together. And the assignment was pretty straightforward, I would say. Was just getting them to talk about how they and the boy connect, how the touch points of their lives might connect or might be completely different. And I would say that as a teacher, the responses to this assignment, to my deep surprise, honestly, a few of the responses to it, I shouldn't say all, were you could see a key in a lock clicking with some of these students. As a business school professor, I'm not sure I've ever seen that. I mean, we talk about pretty straightforward issues a lot of times, but I saw the key turn in some of these students. And I also wanted them to be prepared emotionally as they're reading the book about parts of what they may be seeing. Dachau is not like Auschwitz, where the majority of the camp is intact in a way as it was at the end of World War II. However, they will be seeing gruesome things. And I wanted them to connect with the material and think about it before they're actually seeing it, to help emotionally prepare them for that and intellectually. Dachau is next month. We're taking a guided tour of the camp. And that part I'm actually not too worried about, because as opposed to Auschwitz, although there's some obviously troubling things that you're going to see in Dachau, it's going to open your mind in a different way, because a lot of the people who initially went into Dachau were German citizens who were just against the Nazi government. So it's yet again a different, they may or may not know this, but they're going to get even a wider perspective that it wasn't just, it was for the most part against these people who were in the out group. However, in the beginning, as this concentration camp system got set up, anyone who was an enemy of the state, politically speaking, was also part of this. So we'll see how that goes in. So as part of the study abroad, we're seeing different industries and doing different cultural events, but after Dachau, you can't just take them out for a beer. Not that I ever would, if there are any administrators here. But I wanted to have a place to decompress and process. I don't know their personal backgrounds, whether someone is Jewish and who's going to be horrified by this experience in a way that that person may or may not be able to comprehend from reading the book. So, and to share to the extent that they want to share, not forcing anything, but to try to create a debriefing scenario for them to talk about their feelings and process it also intellectually. And that's where I'm going to ask for your help in terms of what kinds of questions that I can use to kind of spur the conversation. Because right now my list is kind of scattershot because I'm not sure what's going to hit home to spur discussion. So I'm not sure if you can read that in the room. So the general, what are your thoughts and feelings? But a lot of times in a group of 20 to 25-year-olds, you're not actually going to get anyone to speak necessarily. So should concentration camps be tourist destinations? What's the ethics of that? I have no idea. So it might be a sideways way to start that conversation. How can we reconcile the same question I asked of the German business culture speaker, who is wonderful, by the way. How do you reconcile the beauty and the beast of German culture, language, everything? And we have to get eventually to the how will this affect you in the future in terms of your business decision making? So that's the end point after we go through the beginning of how do we process these emotions and feelings. It has been 35 years around since I stepped foot for the first time at a concentration camp in Lublin, where I went to school for a year for language and culture. They had the one of the largest concentration camps that were just barreled over. So really it's just a field where you see an indent where all these horrible things, but nuns at Cool, which is the acronym for the school, it's cool school. They talk about things like what it smelled like in Lublin at that time that they'll never forget, which is just horrible, but it's an important part, all the senses. So this is where I'm asking for your help as to what kinds of questions might be useful to try to elicit that fine line between getting them to talk, but not, like, if they're not comfortable talking about things that might touch very deep personal nerves. I don't want to cross a line in terms of what I should be asking them to talk about in a group situation. So I would really love anyone's feedback on that issue. So this started out as a really small thing in my mind. It was, how do I bring a group of students to Germany prepared to see some of the things that they're going to see? And am I myself as an educator prepared to help them on that journey? And my answer was resoundingly no. I need help. I have a background. I mean, I've spent years in Poland where a lot of conversations start out with, well, in 966, Catholicism came to the country. So I've had lots of those conversations, but not exactly this way. And ethical topics are complicated, and your point of view matters in this. My point of view is decidedly different from anyone else's point of view on this topic at this moment in the room. I wanted to be able to try different ways to communicate and have the students absorb the lessons. So I didn't think there was one thing like, here, read a book, this is going to be the solution. So I wanted to use a series of events to prepare for Germany. I did not mention, as just tying the knot for the Munich study abroad, we also had last Friday a German business culture, which was really interesting. After the speaker left, we talked for an hour. And then in 2 weeks, the test kitchen is helping make apparently very healthy pretzels with us. But to try to get them in a study abroad setting to get excited about Germany and to feel it, smell it. So stark but important lesson in business ethics. Like one of the questions to Haley in the very beginning was, well, what about the Uyghurs? And what didn't come up during that presentation was there is US legislation preventing businesses from working directly with companies that have business in that part of China. But it's a question that's going to come up every year, someplace on the planet. So we need to try to figure out how to communicate. So thank you very much. My small presentation, but I really have enjoyed the process of this. If you can enjoy Holocaust, it seems wrong to say, but the process of learning how to deal with a very complicated ethical topic has been a journey for me too, not just students.
Thank you. We're going to, open it up for dialogue and encourage the people that are online that they can also unmute and ask the questions or put it in the comments. But I'm going to start out with a question, and it's probably a lot of other people were thinking the same thing. When you show the process of genocide, some of it starts with, what's in the press, right? And the culture. Well, here in the US, we've been having an awful lot of that. Right. And businesses, I mean, this thing about ESG, they're not supposed to even do ESG and stuff. I mean, how can they be ethical and not address some of these things? Has that come up yet in your discussions?
Not really. And it might be because I get nervous about talking about current political events in Colorado Springs, but I probably would be nervous anywhere in the country because although I personally am horrified by the dehumanizing language that happens every day in our press, I find it, I don't know where as an educator to bring up that conversation, but cut off by extreme views that are just ethically appalling to me.
Well, it's interesting because the propaganda by the Nazis was newspapers and radio, but now we've got social media, which is totally unregulated and So it's just interesting. It'll be interesting to see if it comes up in any other like papers or discussions or if they bring it up.
No, I think it's an important thing. I don't think it didn't come up during the Holocaust, but they were focused on such a thing, and it was mostly in the past, which was fine. I mean, that's how we learn. But yeah, that's tricky.
I had a thought on using concentration camps as tourist destinations. I went to the Flight 93 Memorial before it was completely developed.
The Pennsylvania one?
Yes,
Okay.
and you drive for 20 minutes through it's probably a reclaimed strip mine, even if they don't want to admit it. So it's like really kind of this desolate landscape that you drive through, and then you get there, and then you have to walk down this. You actually go through like an entrance station, and then you have to walk down this like leak corridor. It was raining the day I went there. And so I think there's ways to make something a tourist destination if you prepare people mentally as they come in. And I know like Auschwitz has had issues with like influencers like taking pictures with their handbags on the tracks. So I think it can be done, but it's one of those things where you have to, even before they get there, like have some sort of like bottleneck entry to mentally prepare people for proper behavior and proper respect. And like this, you're not going here to take pictures, you're going here to experience. And like you were just talking about smells and, I don't know, that was just my comment. I think it can be done, but I think maybe people aren't always prepared.
Yeah, and that is actually a specific issue that I'm not, like, I was hoping that I would, by them doing all these things, I wouldn't have to say, don't be a jerk. Like at a minimum,
You might as well just say that, right?
Yeah.
And I would agree with you, like, as I was thinking about a tourist attraction as an educational opportunity, and obviously no one would go. If you said, oh, this is an amazing educational opportunity for you. So that's why they sell them in that other way. And also, the people who really created the most powerful tourist attraction / educational opportunities in my opinion, have really attended to that in terms of the entrance and the sort of, it's almost like a story arc, like the lead up to the most awful parts of, I think mainly about the Holocaust Museum in Washington DC. Like, to me, that's just an amazing educational opportunity because of that very thing that you talked about. And I don't think that the public really understands how necessary that is and how powerful that is. And sometimes the people creating the tourist attraction also do not understand how necessary that is for the very reasons that you talked about. So I think it requires a change, like for you to prepare your students, like maybe even have that conversation. Like that's a great question for before you go in.
Okay.
Because that creates for them in their mind, like, oh, this isn't just, these are big tourist attractions sound like fun, it's gonna be sunshine. You know, we're gonna party and take pictures. That's not what you're doing. So if you talk about it on the bus on the way there, even though I loved that question where you had it as well, I think it might help alleviate some of what you're talking about, which is you don't have to then say don't be a jerk. You probably do, but yeah. Probably young.
you know what? Because we've had all of these events before, I've had a chance to get to know the students in a way that I wouldn't necessarily know if we just like dropped into Germany. Right. So I don't think anyone, I would be really shocked if any one of those people did that, but just in case.
Well, and it's not for this maybe class, but maybe for
Future.
everybody else.
Yeah, we are actually going to Germany again, to Frankfurt, next year. So it is something that we're gonna have to continuously kind of address.
Maybe turn it around and you make it part of the debriefing. I frame a question like this, like acknowledge that people go to Auschwitz and take pictures on the rails, right, and act disrespectfully, and then make them think about one of the questions you had, like, or I guess it was from the prompt, like the response was, they should lack respect, right, for other people. You might ask, like, how is it that people can come to this knowing what it is and still be disrespectful, right? And so it's almost like it's a minor, in comparison, a minor version, but it's of the same kind, if lesser degree, that like being sucked into an environment and a culture and a practice activity, maybe myopically focus on something and making decisions that are disrespectful, right? And so you might be kind of make it a small case to get them to think about that bigger picture thing again, but also kind of apply to what they just did, right? So it kind of brings it home, maybe adds another more layer like that.
Michelle had a really good point because she's actually been to Duckville, and so I asked her if she could unmute and share her experiences.
Great.
Okay, I'll try to be brief because I have like a lot of thoughts and I've tried to put those in the chat, Carol. So if you want to go back and review those, they're kind of written down for you.
Can't hear you.
Okay, so I put all of this in the chat as well, just so that it's recorded. I've been to Dachau and it was not thoughtfully planned where we would have some sort of a debrief afterwards. So I'm really grateful that you're putting this thought in because it's absolutely necessary to have a conversation afterwards. I would recommend, because I'm a writing teacher and we can't help ourselves, have your students start with just a silent journal reflection. Don't give them a prompt. Don't tell them what to write about. Just let them like explore their experience through writing by themselves. Let them figure out how to formulate their thoughts into words. Like that can sometimes help students feel a little bit more confident in wanting to share those ideas, but also being very respectful of the potential need for privacy, given the very like emotional reaction that people have to that. There is a memorial sculpture at Dachau by Nandor Glid that is one of the most striking and horrifying things I think I've ever seen in my life. If you haven't seen it, you should Google it real quick because it's incredible. That piece of art, I think, is one of the more moving things at Dachau, especially since, like you said, a lot of the physical evidence of like the sleeping quarters and the showers and things like that have been since removed. So I would ask your students to think about maybe how that sculpture, how that piece of art made them feel, and then open up a conversation about the role of art, of sculpture, of memorial, how that works into remembrance. And I'm sure we have colleagues in VAPA that would be really great at helping you maybe structure a conversation around the role of art and ethics. And then just my one last thought was your students will see how close the town is to the concentration camp. That physical proximity is hard to ignore. And so maybe have them imagine the citizens of that town and the ethical implications of living so close that it just seems impossible that they could have been unaware of what was going on there. The ethics of being a citizen, the ethics of either going with the flow or being helpless or hopeless to speak up against a government. Like, those are also big conversations that I think speak to some of the things that you opened with today about how maybe as individual citizens, it feels like we don't have enough of a voice to stand up against unethical things that we see in larger structures. And I don't want to give the citizens of that town too much credit to suggest that every single one of them were against it, because I don't know that that's actually true. But maybe just give your students an opportunity to discuss that aspect of visiting that specific concentration camp as well.
So just a quick question to follow up on that. Do you think it would be useful or open up a crazy can of worms? Because I still have to physically get them back to the hotel, which is like a half-hour to 45-minute journey on public transportation. But I was thinking that maybe handing them journals to journal in front of the statue, or so, like taking notes for themselves during the visit.
I wonder if maybe you could encourage them to journal their entire trip. And so maybe make that like one of the, I don't know, class materials that you encourage them to bring for the entirety of the trip. They can think of their reflections at Dachau as just an entry into a journal that they've already been writing in since they've been in Munich.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, they do have to answer specific questions at the end of this process and create videos. But yeah, that's a good thing to hand them a journal and tell them that it will help them prepare, and suggest and ask them on the morning that we go to Dachau to bring their journals, because there may be things that they want to capture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the day before we're going to a brewery. So it's it's a roller coaster. Thank you.
Really, journaling during a study abroad trip period is really important, just because you do so much in such a small amount of time that you want to try to savor and remember as much of it as you can. So getting in the habit of them journaling regularly throughout the trip will make it seem more obvious that that's why they should be bringing that journal with them.
I was just going to give a couple comments. So I was thinking about what Michelle was saying about the reaction and response to a particular piece. And I had a similar experience when I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And it was the shoe display. That was the one thing that just hit me in a certain
It's so
way.
practical.
It was. And so having them think of, like, kind of putting that in, that discussion, it could be anything within the tour that hits them. So maybe that's what they need to be thinking about, what was it about, that really clicked for you, or sparked that emotional response, or a different idea, or whatever, because it doesn't have to just be one thing, because it's going to be something different for everybody. So keeping that in mind, and then thinking about preparing to go, having them become aware of how they do respond to emotionally type situations or triggers. I don't mean that as a negative comment, but something that does trigger or invoke a an emotional response and thinking about how they respond to that. Because it may not be writing. I may need to talk to somebody right away to process this information, or I may be having a physical emotional response to this. So, you know, and kind of having that conversation ahead of time so that students can support one another and that they have an opportunity to express that emotion and work through that emotion in the way that they do that naturally. You know what I'm saying? Because it's not always necessarily writing that people will process that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. Something years ago, I went to Georgia State for their teaching, how to teach, because again, handed a syllabus in a book. And one of the little facts that kind of stuck in my head was that 80% of business professors were, if you believe in Myers-Briggs, take grain of salt here, 80% of college business professors were INTJs, and the students were exactly the opposite, where they need to talk to process. So I'd rather sit in a corner with a journal myself, but I think the students are different.
Yeah. So I'm going to do both of you talk about this because I feel like my social worker heart is so full listening to everything that you're planning to do and then sort it out with deeper personalization and and this attention that you're giving to the way that ethics can interplay with the way that we live our lives, or the way that the students will live their lives as business people in the world. So thank you for that, and everything you just said as well. Like, so that's my compliment, that you are really giving, this is so intentional, and the way that you're providing opportunity, like either writing or I think that verbal like preparation beforehand might have strong feelings about this. And just let's be ready and let's think about how we can manage them. It's so pragmatic and also so intentional to their mental health. So I love that you do this and that was great. And I think that what you're doing is just an amazing preparation for your students. And I'm also like really blown away by the way that you're bringing indigenous fund ethics into what you're doing as like just to be good people in the world. Like, thank you so much for doing that. And I just love it. That's what I wrote in my notes for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy.
There was other comment I was thinking about too, when you're talking about the reactions of other people. So having them think about, you know, their behavior within those kinds of places, but then how are you going to respond to those who are acting outside of what you would expect to be proper behavior in those destinations? Because, you know, there's a lot of dynamic going on that I was just thinking about, because I get very annoyed or disrespectful about anything. That is a very strong principle that I have. And so, especially when you're emotionally stressed in that environment, and then somebody else is acting like a jerk or outside of how you would ever think that would be appropriate behavior in a place like that. So I think that those are good things to kind of be thinking about, having conversations about as well. Just, you know, how will I respond to somebody who's being so disrespectful? I'm going to say something.
Well, actually in Tibet, I had a very interesting situation where there was a tourist with a selfie stick taking a picture of herself among Tibetans who were praying in front of the most holy temple that they have. So I can bring another context into it to say how horrified I was, disrespectful, and my inclination in those things is to walk away, which is probably not.
Even think about if they could do like a 1 minute, how they use, you know, how they use the principles during their trip would be a really neat way for them to just wrap it up, you know, say something about what they learned that isn't so, you know, personal that you couldn't share it. Because these are things that you could really use to promote other international study trips, because I think what you've done is amazing. And then we do have another comment online. Recommend a plan to deal with a student who is triggered. You don't want to deal with that on the fly.
Other than trying to give the person a hug and Asking how they're feeling and what I can do to help.
It's interesting, it's really helpful just to ask the student, what can we do right now? Yeah, what do you need? I love the one on the suicide and grief.
Yes.
You guys remember that
Yes, that-
resource? That was an eye opener for me.
Yeah.
You don't want to try to solve their problem, you just want to ask them, how can you, what are they feeling? You just let them talk it out and, yeah.
Yeah, I think those steps that she outlined in that process would be very helpful.
My natural inclination is to try to solve it, but this kind of thing, I understand that about myself, that there's not a chance on earth I am equipped to solve anything. So that actually is easier for me in this situation to just say, how can I help? What are you feeling? What can we do?
And years ago, we had a instructor by the name of Marianne Sonderman, who was in a concentration camp. And she got her master's degree when she was in her 50s. She taught political science. She taught for many years. Then she retired. And she had her tattoo on her arm. She didn't talk much about it. But she was the sweetest thing. Every Christmas, she'd make homemade tea in little jars and give it to all the people, staff, and our instructors. But she had, quite, a history kind of, when she was a little girl, when she was in a concentration camp.
Because I've been in situations where I've sort of been chaperoning people, and as that in that role, you almost can't enjoy the experience. And enjoy is not the right word. I get that in the context of what you're discussing here, but you almost can't immerse yourself the same way that your students are immersing themselves. You have to step back and be their chaperone and guard them, and that's got to be your focus. Because I've had multiple times where I've been in situations where you have somebody who completely throws your plan off, right? So you'll have the student who maybe has an issue, unfortunately needs some care and attention. I love how you'll deal with that, but then you could have a second one, or it could require some logistical thing, or maybe you need contact numbers for somebody that they can call, right, if they need to talk to somebody more personally, or things. Crisis mitigation plans in place, just the what ifs, just what if this thing to death, if you're really concerned about that. I only wanted just to bring that up. And only one other point I had, a great discussion, by the way, so thank you for having this today, was sort of the ethical sort of, we talk about, cultural relevance and historical relevance and ethics a lot. And so, I mean, there's been genocides through history, which were not called genocides because that word didn't come out until, post World War II, but sort of the context of how this event could occur. Like, I like the whole construct of it's so close to the town, how the student's going to feel about that, put them in the position of the citizens of the town. But how do German citizens in the context of historical relevance and genocidal acts and their knowledge or lack of knowledge could have or maybe help prevent a situation like this? So a couple food for thought.
Thank you for your thoughts. Yeah, good idea. This is my first, I've taken business groups to places, but never students. If that event has a big impact on them, that particular visit, I know from personal experience that it's hard to walk in the grass after you've seen such horror. Like, it's not real. Like, that's not real and this isn't real. And it takes a emotional adjustment to get back to life as usual. But then you look at behaviors around you, like, how do these people feel so entitled and such horror? So yeah, that's a good idea.
The other thing I was thinking of, I'm not sure how it would work for a short trip, but if they have some sort of card, to put in their phone to be able to use it there, or some way to connect to the internet, if they are set up with WhatsApp and have family members or people they can talk to and decompress with, set up on WhatsApp, and they are making an international call. They could have they'll probably want it in place before they leave, so they don't have to think about it.
Yeah, we already talked about a WhatsApp group thing that works really well, especially if someone's like out there. We talked about the lots of different cases where the WhatsApp might be a good way for them to reach me if they were needed help.